Thanks.
Hello there, and welcome to the webinar on utilizing behavior analysis to prevent cross-border crimes. I am Iris Toledano, Product Marketing Manager at Winward, and I'm very excited to welcome you all. We are privileged to have with us leading experts from the maritime and intelligence domain who will share their experience about the use of technology to identify, evaluate, and prioritize risk and fighting cross-border crimes. Before we begin, a few words about Winward. Our mission is to digitalize the maritime ecosystem to achieve operational readiness through predictive intelligence. The largest countries and organizations in the world partnered with Winward to secure their maritime borders using Winward predictive intelligence solutions to analyze and provide insight on vessels' behavior. When it comes to maritime security, it's all about gaining control over the risk ahead. Leading organizations are empowered by integrating Winward predictive intelligence solutions, enhancing their capabilities to turn data into actionable intelligence, flagging and analyze maritime activities every day, providing insights to understand what is happening at sea, both the known and unknown. Our key aim with this session is to bring together people and organizations from all over the world to discuss the role of technology in securing maritime borders and continue facilitating collaboration across the maritime security ecosystem. During the webinar, we invite you to send your questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. In the interest of privacy, we won't reveal your full name or your company unless you specifically indicate otherwise. I am thrilled to introduce Rear Admiral Nick Lambert, our moderator for this webinar. Nick is a master mariner and concluded a long naval operational career as the UK National Hydrographer. Globally connected, Nick is a key thought leader on blue economy potential and tech innovation in associated domains. Over to you, Mr. Lambert.
Thank you very much indeed, Iris, and good afternoon, everybody. Fabulous to see so many people attending, and nearly 100 at the moment, and a real pleasure to join our fellow panelists this afternoon. Here's the agenda, which will take you through stage by stage. Each panelist is going to speak for about 5 to 10 minutes on each subject. And as Iris says, please do put questions in the chat, and we will do our best to respond to the chat or to the Q&A session, as well as pick up the questions in discussion. However, time is tight, so get those questions in there and we'll do our best to answer them offline after the event if required. As Iris said, my background is all marine and maritime. My company, NLA International, is a blue economy solutions company. We spend a lot of our time building a picture of what's going on around us, and we're passionate believers in the ability of AI and machine learning to detect behaviors. And this particular approach to looking at cross-border crimes and preventing them by using clever technology, AI and ML, as I said, and also space-based data sets and archive data sets, as well as ground truthing sensors, is a very exciting opportunity to discuss some of the issues and what the technologies can do with us. For us. So with no further ado, in the interest of time, I'm going to go straight to Keith Ditcham. Real pleasure to see you here on the panel, Keith. Keith is the Director of Organised Crime and Policing. He's also a Senior Research Fellow for the Royal United Services Institute. Keith, we're really lucky to have you with us here this afternoon. The digital floor is yours. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm just trying to see if I can find my presentation, actually. So bear with me 1 second. Find.
you not find it?
No, 1 second. It will come to me.
Right.
It's just popping up here.
Okay. I can open it and share it for you if you wish. See if I can do that.
Have you got that shown
Both
up on
of
the
us
screen
can
now?
try.
Nick, is that
No.
showing on the screen or not?
No, nothing's seen.
I've got it
Right,
up on
I've
my
got the
screen.
presentation. Wait one.
If you
Yeah,
want,
I got the
Wait one,
presentation.
see if I
So
can share.
let me share the screen again, and let's take it from here. Thank you.
Ah, good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, Keith.
okay, well, I do apologise for a slight technical hiccup there. And I appreciate time is tight. I just wanted to talk a little bit, really, to put things in context, a little bit about the threat. And what we've seen about the whole global illicit flows is just how dynamic it is and how much it's changed over recent years. It represents a multi-dimensional threat to the global economy, with estimates that it costs, according to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, it costs global economy more than $2 trillion US dollars every year, and that's lost to smuggling and counterfeiting and a range of global illicit activity. What we've seen in particular in relation to trafficking routes, as well as availability of drugs, Colombia has recorded the highest yield in its history in 2017. And in addition to that, we've seen trafficking routes both to Europe, which is our particular interest, moving away from Venezuela and to other countries such as Uruguay. We've seen them come to the fore recently with a big seizure in December 2019. And then also onto the African continent, nothing particularly new there, and the use of the so-called Highway 10, but also countries such as South Africa, Guinea-Bissau also recording large seizures as well. If you could move me to my next slide, please. I'm sorry, but I can't see what you're seeing at all. So I'm not quite sure what's actually happened here. But what I wanted to talk just a little bit about then in relation to sort of highlighting that threat and how dynamic it is the need to actually consider activity within 4 key areas. And I've broken these areas into targeting of high value targets. This is the ability to know who are the criminals that are behind the activity, not only on a local but on a global level. In terms of hot spotting, and I'll come back to talking a little bit about that, but sort of key areas and key nodes, the ability to link investigations either through intelligence or evidence, and also a range of preventive measures. And part of what we're talking about here today, the use of technology in the maritime sphere, most definitely that's where technology has a role to play, and can really help fast track some of the activities that I want to talk about. So if we deal with targeting of high value targets in the first place, a lot of my time spent as a liaison officer, both in Latin America and in Europe, was around identifying who the global targets are, not just those that affect the particular country in which you're working or the particular country that you represent, but who are the key players, because there are a limited number of people. And what are their target profiles? And what we understand and what we identify is that a lot of these criminals are involved in polycriminality. So in particular in relation to drugs, it's a commodity, but these criminals will operate within a range of taxonomy of offences similar to smuggling and illicit flows, and not just purely restrict themselves to one particular crime type. And we've seen a flattening of criminal organisations over the years, a move away from some of the larger cartels, such as the famous or the infamous Medellin and Cali cartels, into smaller groups. But the important thing is to be able to track and identify both the global to local. So everything from the large scale criminality down to those people that are actually responsible at the market end of distributing the drugs. And I talk about here about seizing opportunity versus the commodity, because very often a lot of law enforcement effort is geared towards seizing drugs and making arrests. And whilst that is very important, and please, I spent a career doing this and a very enjoyable career, and I certainly don't diminish the importance of that. I think at times there are opportunities that come our way that perhaps we don't seize quick enough, or perhaps we didn't seize quick enough. An opportunity to disrupt an organised crime group, an opportunity to use technology in a way that might actually advance activity a lot quicker, rather than necessarily waiting for that particular drug consignment. If you could move on to the next slide, please. Hotspotting for me. So I do apologise, but I've lost all screen, so I'm just assuming you can see what I can see now. But in relation to hotspotting, this is very much around identifying key choke points. Now that can be whether it be in the cultivation, whether it be in the transportation upstream, whether it can be in terms of use of transport across the Atlantic towards Europe, or use of the Caribbean or Pacific Ocean up towards American markets. But what are the resources that are available in order to tackle that, and how well coordinated are they? Now, you're going to hear shortly from Jose Ferreira, a colleague of mine that works for MAOC, and he'll talk a little bit about those coordination mechanisms, and also there's the Joint Interagency Task Force South in Key West as well. But one of the things that struck me as a liaison officer is, whilst cooperation is good, there's always the ability to make it better, and plenty of opportunity to work further upstream to disrupt the activity, because the more we can do closer to the source of the criminality, the better the chance we have of disrupting it. Moving on then to linking investigations. These can be linked, as I mentioned earlier, either through intelligence or evidence, or linking through forensics. A lot of work's been done looking at where drugs come from and what proportion of the market they make up. And if I talk about the UK here, it comes as no real surprise to me that the bulk of the cocaine that arrives in the UK comes from Colombia, but also some of the rest comes from Peru and Bolivia. Well, we know that because they're the producing countries. So I'm not entirely sure that advances the argument considerably. But what I think is important is to understand where we can link investigations together with our global partners. If we go back to what I was saying earlier about the high value targets that are involved in the criminality, then the ability to link those investigations back to those criminals who undoubtedly sit on top of the criminal organisations gives us a head start. The debriefing of investigations, but also of prisoners and those associated is vitally important, and the ability to get that information back into law enforcement quick time. We are somewhat hidebound at times by certain rules or regulations as to how we can do that, but certainly following a seizure, there's normally a sort of a golden opportunity to act quickly, and the ability to get that information back out to those that need it very quickly, most definitely. And then also lastly in that, and by no means these lists are not exhaustive, they're just some of the key issues that I wish to highlight. The ability to seize criminal assets, and the sharing of those criminal assets in some shape or form can act as an incentive to greater cooperation, greater international cooperation, and it's something that we talk a lot about within RUSI when we look at how to disrupt criminal flows in relation to any form of criminality. And then the last bit I wanted to talk about really was the preventive measures. And some of this is around, yes, demand reduction. We've seen lots of campaigns looking at deforestation, looking at the impact on the environment. And frankly, they don't seem to resonate too much. But some studies have shown that studies where you point to health risks of individuals have far more greater impact. And if you think about that in relation to reducing the attractiveness of cigarette smoking, then there's some parallels there to be made. Crop eradication stands to reason that if the crop's not grown in the first place, then people can't traffic in it. But the main part around that really is the technology and the use of increasing ability to use tools at our hands that can help us identify these things that I'm talking about. So I help identify who the criminals are, identify the sort of the movements and the suspicious behaviour on the high seas and how the activity takes place. What we call criminal business analysis, those parts of the business that enable it to function, and then the use of technology to help us disrupt and dismantle that activity. It's a sad fact that there are far too many people involved in this trade, and the trade is far too attractive to ever think that we will completely eradicate it. But we can certainly make it a lot harder for the criminals. So really, that's as a taster to get the conversation going, and I do appreciate it's a very quick canter through those points. But I'm more than happy to come back to any of those later in question. I'll hand back to you, Nick. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Keith. And perhaps Jose, you could start to bring up your slide ready for the MAOC N presentation, whilst I just have a quick word with Keith. Keith, you've got quite considerable experience in this world. Could you just talk a little bit about what sort of change you've seen over the past few years? Is there an exponential shift in capability? Are you seeing increasing effectiveness? And also, could you talk a little bit about open source? Are you using a lot of open source information these days, as well as in-house data sets? And finally, perhaps look ahead 5 years and say how effective you think we're going to be with the evolution of technology and AI and ML, as I made in my opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, there's quite a few questions there to answer, and I could probably spend a long time, but I won't. So changes, yes, I think we are being more effective, most definitely, and I think that levels of cooperation through the use of certain multilateral bodies like MAOC, for argument's sake, has really helped to shape that. But also what we have seen, and I mentioned it briefly about the flattening of the organised crime structures, is we've seen an exponential growth in the number of people involved in the trade. So whereas perhaps in the past, when I talked about certain cartels being involved, there's now far more criminals involved. And what we've also seen is that whereas in the past, if you take Colombia as an example, very few people, certainly within Europe, dealt with Colombia direct. They're normally dealt via middlemen. What we have now seen is people dealing direct. We've seen third countries operating in, nationals from a third country operating in another. If you think about Ecuador, for argument's sake, the drugs trade there is largely in the hands of Albanian criminals. So these are all things that make the targeting slightly harder and slightly more complex. And again, why it comes back to how we rely on not only human endeavours, but also technological endeavours. You're right to raise the point about open source or OSINT. I think, again, in my time in law enforcement, we tended to concentrate on human intelligence and technical intelligence, and perhaps not mix those things. Having worked outside of law enforcement for a few years for a number of companies where we've used a mixture of both, there's actually a hell of a lot of open source intelligence that's available and a lot of tools available to us that we need to blend and can blend better. And I suspect Jose will talk a little bit about that. And just lastly, where in 5 years' time? Well, in 5 years' time, cooperation, I think, will continue to have grown and to continue to have and improved and got better. The range of tools that we're using and how we use them will have got better. But unless we do something about some of the demand and the supply, then we're still going to be chasing quite a difficult task to try and get on top of.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. And you swept up all the questions. Thank you very much indeed. Really good. And well done for dealing with the IT hiatus at the beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, no questions coming in yet, but please do use the Q&A panel and we'll attempt to answer questions whilst the panelists are speaking. Keith referred to Jose Ferreira and the Maritime Analysis and Operations Center for Narcotics. Now's my chance to introduce Jose and Paulo Silva, and they are going to speak about maritime drug trafficking and behavioral analysis. So Jose and Paulo, the floor is yours. Thank you very much indeed for sparing the time to join us.
Right, thank you very much. Briefly, as we have 10 minutes, I'm going to use 2 of them just to introduce Mayocan for those of you who may not be aware of what we do. And then
you're sharing your slides, Jose.
I'm not sharing, or I am sharing? I hope
No,
I'm sharing.
we haven't. No, you're not sharing yet.
No?
Iris, are you going to put the slides up, or is Jose going to put them up?
It's better if we do it because we had a different presentation. You cannot see my screen.
No.
Let me click again, and now? Can you see it now? Yes.
Yep, tally, cool, we can see it.
Okay,
well done.
I will. Perfect.
All right, so as I was saying, I'm first and foremost allow me to express our gratitude for INWARD invitation to participate in this event. I'm José Ferreira, Mayocan Head of Operations, and with me I have Paul Silva, which is our senior analyst. We were granted with 10 minutes, therefore I'm going to use 2 and only 2, maybe less, hopefully, just to introduce Mayocan for those who may not be fully aware of what we do, and I will hand over the floor to Paulo to talk about what specifically was asked of us, which is to talk about the monitoring and tools used here, specifically Windward, obviously, and this is just to give you some heads-ups. We will not mention, for obvious reasons, any risk indicators, but still I think Paulo's presentation will raise interest anyway. So the Maritime Analysis and Operations Center NARCOTICS, the English acronym is Mayocan, was established following the signing of the treaty in September 2007 by 7 European countries: France, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, the United Kingdom, with a special partnership with USA, notably DEA and JITAF South. And the goal, the primary goal, if we can say it like this, is working together to counter the threat from both movements of cocaine across the Atlantic into Europe by means of intelligence supported by air and surface assets from all the 7 partners, plus, as I've mentioned, the USA. So therefore, Mayocan was built as a platform, a support platform that we hope is flexible, dynamic, and effective. My personal view, its success relies on the physical collocation of country liaison officers from the 7 countries coming from different agencies like police, customs, and also, and that's kind of unique, we have military personnel being from Air Force or even naval attaches. And we work side by side with the center working side by side with the center own permanent staff that includes, I hope, highly skilled drug analysts like Paulo sitting next to me. So this is all done in a framework of full parity, including, and this is also, I dare to say, a bit unique when it comes to the sharing of relevance intelligence. Therefore, we have been receiving lots of positive feedback as an example, and in some regions also setting the standard for others to follow. Matthew, we are a small organization, therefore we tend to cooperate with all different agencies that can raise added value and create synergies. You can see them on the slide. Just a small sentence to add that we do have huge cooperation, I'm going to say intelligence exchange on daily basis with Colombia, Cape Verde, and Brazil, who are key countries for us. Okay, next one, please. I would like to talk to you briefly about the way forward. We've been trying to enlarge our activities in terms of supporting the partner members with other than just, well, not just, that's our core business, the coordination of air and naval, or the assistance in coordinating air and naval assets, and more and more the deconflict of the intelligence that the countries kindly bring to us, and hopefully enhancing that intelligence. But as side events, we have been also involved in organizing numerous practitioners workshops, for instance, on sabotage events on vessels, for instance, technical attacks on vessels. Also, we've been supporting Cape Verde, which is a geographically key country for us. Geostrategically, it's a key country for us, with their supporting training for their Coast Guard regarding their boarding teams. We've also developed recently a seizure library, which hopefully will allow deep rummage teams to access remotely to our library and have similar vessels to the ones they are interested in searching and look for similar situations. And recently taking forward the mandate that we also have created a general aviation cell. Hopefully we can become also, as we are effectively for maritime drug trafficking and canalized maritime drug trafficking, we hope also to become a platform in Europe for the general aviation drug trafficking, notably private jets crossing the Atlantic. Final slide, and very briefly, just to show our results since our inception. I'm not going to waste a lot of time here. I think it's crystal clear that the countries that are part of MEOCAN, obviously, we don't do any seizures or arrests. This is from the MEOCAN 7 countries. I think it's been pretty successful. The figures are talked by, can be pretty illustrative. So without further ado, I'll hand over the floor to Paulo. Thanks.
All right, so to use behavioral analysis to prevent cross-border crimes, and in the case of MEOCAN, maritime drug trafficking, it is obviously important to have an advanced maritime system that will provide all the information we need to perform that analysis. That system should provide current and historical information for obvious reasons. We want to know as soon as possible if a vessel change its name, its flag, or where the vessel is heading to, and historical information will allow us to assess if what is suspicious or not based on a normal behavior pattern of the vessel. So for example, if a vessel was working since 2010 in Southampton in the UK and is now heading south to the Atlantic, is the vessel suspicious? It surely does not match with the normal behavior of that vessel, but it's a starting point for your analysis. So in terms of the information that should be available in these systems, of course there is more, but we should highlight vessel details. It is crucial to have a complete and updated database. Vessel movements, we need to know what the vessel has been doing for the past 10 years and what are the next port of calls. Ownership, we need to know as many details as possible to assess if that vessel has a strong or weak ownership structure. And of course, AIS coverage, we need to track vessels. It is important to have terrestrial and satellite AIS coverage, and of course, if possible, global AIS coverage. And finally, the behavioral information. There are not many systems providing this information, but if a system can detect specific behaviors like drifting, sudden change of speed, sudden change of heading, it is of course an added value. So we have all that information available, but it's not enough. So we need tools, we need system features to make our analysis more efficient and effective. So we want to make sure that our vessel, that we get our vessel, and we want to do it as fast as possible without spending unnecessary time. And considering that sometimes there are thousands of vessels in a specific area, we really need these tools to find what we are looking for. So there are several tools, some are more basic than others. We'll start with filters, which is just in your map, you want to see displayed vessels with a specific flag or a particular type of vessel and so on. Search engine, it will just allow me to quickly search a vessel by its name, its IMO, MMSI. Advanced queries, not all systems have this feature, and it is extremely dependent on the information available on that system, but as we saw on the previous slide, and ideally like windward, it will allow us to combine vessel details, vessel movements, activities, ports, companies, areas, and so on. So in fourth place, we have the alert system. This is a basic tool, and its job is just to notify when something relevant happens. The time machine, also known as timeline, it is an advanced tool which allows us to go to a specific date in the past and see exactly what was the maritime situation in that date. So if you have intelligence that a vessel was engaging in criminal activities in one of your ports, you can just set that date, go back to that time, and check exactly what was happening in that area. And the last three tools are more advanced. So the historical path, this is a single, it will show you in a single map all the historical path of a vessel. I will show you in the last slide how this works. Right now, Windward is the only system we have access to that shows that easily. Then we have vessel risk assessment. As the name says, it's a classification of a vessel as high, medium, or low risk. So if you're doing analysis and you have hundreds of vessels to check, it helps to start from high risk to low risk. And finally, the track analysis. This is a unique feature provided by Windward. And basically, the way it works is the system will analyze the track of a vessel and alert you automatically for any relevant information. As you can imagine, this feature will save you lots of time, and we'll see this with the next example. So the case we brought you today is the merchant vessel Ezer. It was profiled last year, and it was intercepted by the Cape Verdean authorities with over 9.5 tons of cocaine. When this vessel was profiled, we had no access to Windward, so we had no advanced search engine, neither risk assessment or track analysis. So we just did it using filters and analyzing the track manually. But I will show you how we did it and how much easier it would have been with Windward system. So what you see here is the track of the Ezer after departing Panama. So before Windward, we had to get the track of the vessel, export it to KML, open it in Google Earth, and we had to analyze it point by point. And point by point means that you need to check its speed, its heading, it's the distance traveled between 2 points, so you make sure you could detect if the vessel switched off the AIS. So we are looking for suspicious movements that could indicate that the vessel loaded cocaine, and especially looking for inconsistencies. So as you can see here, all this manual work takes lots of time. And in the Windward, this is the track of the Ezer in the Windward system. As you can see, it automatically alerts you for low speed. It automatically alerts you for change of heading. It alerts you for voyage changes. In this case, the crew was declaring Tanger, Morocco as the next port of call, and they changed it to Mindelo, Cape Verde. And again, another change to Mindelo, from Mindelo to Praia, and they also changed the estimated time of arrival, and this last feature called dark activity. So basically, before Windward, every time a vessel switched off AIS, or maybe there was just no coverage in the area, we had to do all the calculations manually. So we had to check the average speed before the vessel switched off the AIS, and the average speed before, after the vessel was transmitting AIS again. We had to measure the distance traveled with the AIS off, and the time the vessel was not transmitting AIS. So with these three things, we could manually calculate the average speed with the AIS off, and in this case, the vessel traveled approximately 337 nautical miles with the AIS off during 54 hours, which makes an average speed of 6.2, as you can see, is considerably low compared to the 10-11 knots that was doing before and after, which could indicate the vessel slowed down or stopped to collect drugs. And in Windward, you have it automatically. So as you can see here, all the calculations are doing automatically without spending any time. If the vessel, if the distance traveled with the AIS off matches the average speed, the system, Windward system will consider it a signal lost. If not, it will consider it a dark activity. And finally, because we already passed our 10 minutes, I just want to show you the historical path feature. This is the case of the Ezer, and just to show you how easily it shows where the vessel is usually sailing and other abnormal, we can call it like that, trips that the vessel may have done. And that's it from our side.
Brilliant, thank you.
Sorry, Nick, just one final 10 seconds just to say, because I don't want to be unfair, and we have a lot of AMSA people also on the audience. The purpose of today's presentation was to focus on Windward, but I have to be fair and to say that Mayocan has been using AMSA systems that they have generally provided to us since our inception, and we still use, and AMSA obviously has a tracker, vessel tracker, and all the other systems, just to be clear here. So I don't want any misunderstandings with the extreme added value that AMSA represents for us. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Mayoc team. A fascinating presentation and a really nice segue to the next presentation, but also following on from Keith Ditcham. John, if you'd like to start bringing up your slides, just want to ask one quick question. Paolo or Jose, could you please tell me whether you think there are going to be new sensor sources or data streams that may be becoming available in, say, the next 5 years that will enhance the data sets that you already have?
Good question for Inward and AMSA. We just end users. We don't really, what we do, to be honest, is we try as much as we can to assist AMSA and other companies, or sorry, AMSA is not a company, but companies like Windward in tailor fitting their systems to our needs. So we do love the automated abnormal behavior systems because that saves us a lot of man work. But the future, to be honest, I'm not sure if Paulo wants to add here. I don't really know how to answer. It's a good question. I just don't have an answer for it.
Well, it's expensive, but we can always include satellite imageries all over the world. So we make sure that we track all the vessels, even if they are not reporting any kind of AIS information.
Sure, that's the point. I think is all about queuing satellites to particular points. So the better the behavioral analysis becomes and the prediction of tracks becomes, the more chance there is of cost effectively queuing a satellite to provide another source of data. But we'll try and pick that up in questions if we've got any time a bit later on. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience are putting questions in the question and answer room. I'd be really grateful if panelists who aren't speaking could please pick up on them. There are 3 or 4 there. If you could, it doesn't really matter who answers, just crack on. I've been pointing out to odd panelists, please answer a question. Please do feel free to just comment on the questions that are being asked. So with no further ado then, so we've had a strategic overview from Keith. We then had the benefits of modern sophisticated AI and ML powered situational awareness platforms to help the analyst and the end user. Now's a chance for a case study from John Schrock, who's a supervisory special agency at the DEA. And John, thank you ever so much for joining us this afternoon, and the digital floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. I'll get the screen up. I've got a 20-minute presentation that we're going to we're not down into 5 minutes so that Mr. Ryan has time at the end.
We're not seeing the presentation yet. If you've shared your screen.
Let's go back.
Iris, stand by to bring up the presentation if John can't make it work, please. We have it. Tally. Well, we got your screen, and there we go. MV thrown. Needs just click on present. Bonza. Thank you.
All right. 20-minute story in 5 minutes so that Mr. Ryan has some time here at the end. Motor vessel thrown. I'm going to cover 5 distinct points as we carry along, not necessarily in that order, but the key pieces will be how did we know to look for the motor vessel thrown? What tools did we use with Windward to identify it? And some of the observations that we made with Windward while it was underway. and then we'll talk about some of the ancillary pieces that help firm up our observations, some of the open source intelligence that was mentioned earlier that was so important to explain what we were seeing and then what the outcome was. So to know how to use Windward, knowing what type of activities are occurring in your area of responsibility are important. You can't use Windward if you don't know what drug trafficking looks like in your neighborhood. And so we, over the last couple of years of using Windward, looked at other vessels that were involved in seizures and found some commonalities in those. That doesn't mean these are the only vessels that are engaged in illicit activity. It was just things that we were aware of that we could focus on and fine-tune Windward to help us locate. So cargo vessels, 100 meters or smaller, service vessels, and then as Paolo mentioned earlier, indications of recent ownership change or lack of utilization, which again would indicate that some sort of ownership change was underway. These are vessels that we had a role in or had studied to be able to put together some of those items that we would use Windward to look for and monitor. Cargo vessels, primarily in this particular slide, most of them were narcotics related except for the Andromeda, which had explosives on board, and some service vessels that all were engaged in drug trafficking events. And most of these were transatlantic events. Once we know what type of vessels we were looking for, we would plug in either a search, an advanced search feature, or set up rules within the rule engine on Windward, and that made the work a lot easier for us. We did not have to hunt and peck all day through the system. We waited for messages to come to us to tell us we should be looking at a particular vessel. And in this case, we're going to be talking about the motor vessel Throne. It was a 5-month endeavor. Of course, we didn't watch it for the entire 5 months. It was brought to our attentions across the Atlantic. And then once it completed its westward journey and started back east was when we started paying very close attention to it. The first set of facts that brought our attention to the motor vessel Throne was as it arrived coming out of Ecuador after placing its cargo there. It took a concrete equipment manufacturing or production type of hardware to Ecuador, according to the authorities there, and then departed. And as it arrived in Panama, it made its first change of destination. Originally, it had declared it was going to the north coast of Venezuela to Guanta. And then as it arrived in Panama, it changed from Guanta to Guyana. And you'll see a common pattern here where there was multiple destination changes along the route. Once it crossed the canal, it loitered near the coast of Colombia and Panama, and that was another observation where we were slightly suspect as to what was taking place. However, through the use of some of the layers within Windward, we attributed that initially to some rough seas. Once it crossed the canal, we had our partners in Panama provide a crew list. And on that crew list were 16 Indians and 1 Turk. We shared that intelligence with our friends at the MAOC, who reported that the lone Turk was the subject of a prior vessel of interest of theirs, which was one more item that increased our suspicions. The fact that the one individual on board who didn't look like all of the others was also of interest to the MAOC on prior event was one more item to concern us. We also checked the crew for travel and found out that that lone Turk did not come across the Atlantic on the vessel. He actually joined the vessel en route. And when we went back and looked at travel records for Mr. Osgore, the Turk, we found that he flew from Istanbul to Havana. He found his way to Caracas somehow. And then from Caracas went on to Guayaquil, where he joined the boat. If we would have done more research, we would have found that he traveled with the load organizer, Mr. Tokgaz, and those are his travel records on the right, which would tend to indicate that he traveled last year to Brazil and to San Jose, Costa Rica, what appears to be pre-planning for this particular venture. Open source was mentioned earlier, and we found it was kind of important in this particular event. In particular, if you note the date on the travel records for Mr. Topgaz in 2019, he traveled to Brazil in August. And in this case, the records that we reviewed in open source kind of link up with that a little bit. So the upper left-hand corner is the crossing document provided by Panama as it came across the canal. The two pieces there that were interesting were the phone number. Open sourcing that links to Bezat Topgaz, the load organizer. And then the second piece that was interesting was the domain name for the email address, starkshippingco.com, was established or registered in August of 2019. That corresponds with that planning, or what we suspected to be planning travel in August when he went to Brazil. While we're waiting for this vessel to move, which is kind of nice when we're targeting vessels because they move so slowly, there's time to do the research. We went back through the windward records and found that for well over a year, the vessel was in two different shipyards in Turkey. That's going to be the upper middle of the screen there. And then after departing the Tuzla and Altanova shipyards is when it made its identity change. That's the information in the upper right of the screen. And then after making its identity change is when it departed on this particular voyage. That's November of 2019, and it went to the waters off Istanbul to refuel. What we also found interesting, whether it's just coincidence or relevant, is that as it arrived near Istanbul, it made this kind of weird loop around the last known position for the motor vessel Esser, which, as you recall, the Mayhawk brief just a few minutes ago was a 10-ton seizure. May just be coincidence, but nonetheless, it was an observation we made with windward tool. So as that vessel departed the loiter off the coast of Panama and Colombia and went across the north coast of Colombia and Venezuela, there was no loitering activity. And while those waters are suspicious, motoring that close to them, we saw no activity that warranted an interdiction at that point. The vessel went ahead and ported in Trinidad and then loitered for a month off the north coast of Trinidad. After loitering for a month, it returned to port and appeared to take on fuel and maybe some supplies. And as it departed, it declared it was going to Panama. And that's its venture to Panama, which of course, as you all can see, is not a trip to Panama. Immediately upon departing from Panama, it changed its destination again back to Trinidad, even though it was traveling to the northwest towards Jamaica. There was some loiters off the Dutch islands there, Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire as it went towards Jamaica. Upon arrival at Jamaica around the evening of the 18th, it loitered off about 100 miles to the southeast of Jamaica. It then changed its destination again from Trinidad, in this case to Turkey, and it departed to the southeast. And again, a couple of days later, as it's traveling to the southeast, changed its destination again to Belém, and then again had some additional loitering events as it was traveling to the south and the east. During this period of time, my job at DEA working at SOD was to try to coordinate with JADF South for an interdiction based on the facts that we had gathered and presented, most of which is summarized here, mostly law enforcement data and open source information. JADF was not convinced that the profile was sufficient to warrant an interdiction effort. And so we took what was all unclassified law enforcement information and shared it with the Trinidad Coast Guard, and the Trinidad authorities entertained our interest in the interdiction, which they did on the 29th. They took it to port. Based on these observations that we shared with them, one of the key pieces is all of the inconsistent activities with normal commerce. At $4,000 or more a day to operate a ship like that, all of the things that was going on was not consistent with normal commerce. And with the other details that we provided, Trinidad was happy to oblige us with an interdiction and a search. This case is pretty much resolved at this point, so we'll show just a few of the details there. As it arrived in port, the Trinidad authorities shared that not only was there one Turk on board, but there was a second Turk on board, and that just happened to be Mr. Topgaz, Bezat Topgaz, who was the load organizer and somebody that came up in that open source intelligence search. On day one, the search for contraband was negative results. Our Trinidad partners had conversations with the crew, and one or more of the crew cooperated overnight and led them to where the contraband had been stashed on board, about 500 kilograms of cocaine. During the course of the interviews with the crew, they learned that the contraband and the load organizer there, Mr. Tupgaz, was taken on board at those coordinates. And so while we don't see behavior at that particular location that would help illustrate that, we always take the intelligence that we gain from the event and kind of fold it into the scenario to see what we can learn going forward. They evidently loaded that 500 kilograms of cocaine while underway, along with taking on that particular passenger. And the other last piece of note is that this vessel was destined for Belém, or so they claimed, and the crew did indicate that they would be going to Belém to pick up an additional 3 tons of cocaine. Back to you, Nick.
That's fascinating. Again, seeing how a platform can work, and also you've just confirmed my view that it isn't ships that behave illegally, it's people who behave illegally, people in companies and those sorts of entities. So whilst Andrew brings up his slides, again, looking ahead 5 years, are you seeing an exponential improvement in the ability to track these behaviors and to identify these suspicious vessels and the people who are operating them?
Well, I'm very excited that Windward continues to take feedback from its clients, and to the extent that they can improve their software to meet our journeyman interests and how the GUI functions for us, how the workspace functions for us, and then some other partnerships that they're working on to where commercial imagery, maybe commercial RF and things like that will hopefully be incorporated. And the key point as it relates, those particular things relate to the work that we did in this instance, is the things that go on maybe at the MAOC or at JADF South, in some cases can't be shared with certain countries based on where the information comes from. However, with the use of Windward and commercial products, I can give all of this to somebody like the Trinidad Coast Guard without concern of compromising sources and methods. And so that to me is one of the most important critical things. And of course, this just builds on partnerships. The folks in Trinidad love us because we gave them things on this event that they never got through their relationship with the US government in any other instance. So those partner relationships, I think, will improve a great deal through the use of Windward and sharing it with some of our partners.
Cool. Thank you very much indeed. So I'm now going to give the floor to Andrew Ryan, who's the Maritime Operations Manager of the Irish Tax and Customs Administration. He's going to talk about examining behaviour and routine risk management. Iris, I think we're going to overrun by a few minutes. So please let me know on the chat how long I can run on for. And gentlemen, please do get stuck into the questions coming in the chat, in the Q&A panel, please. The floor is yours then, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction, Nick. I'll just confirm, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yeah, tally.
Roger. We're delighted to speak today regarding behaviour in informing routine risk assessment and developing actionable insights into tackling cross-border crime in the maritime domain. Given Ireland's geostrategic location on the western periphery of the European Union, our proximity to very busy shipping lanes and also rich fishing grounds, our understanding of risk is vitally important, and it is continuously evolving. It's driven by data, by traffic, trends, profiles, and intelligence. Just the format of my discussion today would be firstly a brief introduction in relation to revenue, followed by an overview of the kind of full spectrum of non-compliance that we deal with in the maritime domain, And then finally, I'll outline some of the different behaviours that inform routine risk assessment, which can lead to actionable insight into tackling cross-border crime in the maritime domain. By means of an introduction, revenue is the tax and customs administration for Ireland, and while revenue customs discharge is primarily a customs trade facilitation role, it is also responsible at an operational level for anti-smuggling at the frontier and in the maritime domain. And as well as an operational role, revenue customs in Ireland is also the competent authority for approving operations under Article 17 of the United Nations Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances. Revenue Customs has a full-time liaison officer in the Maritime Analysis and Operations Centre for Narcotics in Lisbon, as well as officers in Europol and the UK. Revenue Customs deals with the full spectrum of non-compliant behaviour in the maritime domain. This ranges from the lower end of the spectrum of non-compliant behaviour, such as failure to make customs declarations, to VAT avoidance, or maybe abuses of the temporary importation regime on pleasure craft. And as you move up along that spectrum, you start heading towards white-collar crime and criminality, where we come across issues in relation to unexplained wealth, proceeds of crime being used to finance high-value pleasure craft as a means of moving assets between jurisdictions. And then we also deal with non-compliant behaviour in relation to crew-based smuggling, where it might be a merchant vessel or a fishing vessel, where a crew member or a number of crew members may be involved in the smuggling of drugs, cigarettes, or weapons. And then finally, up to the more serious non-compliant behaviour, which is the use of different types of vessels used for the smuggling of commercial quantities of drugs, cigarettes, and other prohibitions and restrictions from source and transit countries to Ireland. Let's look a little bit closer then at some of the different behavioural components that inform risk assessment and may also provide actionable insight. It's been mentioned a little bit in the previous presentations, but ownership is a really, really important behavioural indicator in terms of who is the owner, where is the owner based, is there a clearly identifiable corporate structure behind the owner, or is it little more than a brass plate, and how long has that corporate structure existed? Has the vessel recently changed ownership? And we often look at does the owner have more than one vessel? Traffic patterns can also give a good insight in relation to how vessels operate and how all vessels operate. We look at traffic patterns, maritime domain awareness, and vulnerability all inform our behavioural analysis. When you consider traffic patterns, does the vessel voyage avoid shortest routes or proximity to land? Can some of these deviations be explained by weather? Other examples might be if a particular fishing vessel or service vessel is now operating off our coast where normally we would not expect to see vessels operating. Maritime domain awareness is continuously improving from terrestrial AIS to satellite-based AIS, and then also other positional data sources such as VMS or fishing vessel transponder data. AIS allows a comprehensive analysis of the vessel's track to examine is the vessel's behaviour expected and consistent. It allows a real-time picture of the vessel today and also a historic analysis. The challenge for maritime domain awareness is around the vessels that are not fitted with AIS or turn off their AIS. And while this can be mitigated by maritime assets, maritime patrol aircraft, and increasingly the use of drone technology and Earth observation, it creates the potential in the future of fusing this data for an even richer behavioural analysis of the AIS displaying vessels. We also consider the vulnerability of a specific location or locations as another means of providing insight as to relationship between remote locations having a higher probability of being used as a potential landing point for smuggling. We've performed analysis of the knowledge of the type of craft, such as the size of the vessel and the draft of a vessel. They can access ports, harbours and piers, and this can provide useful insight into identifying suspicious behaviour in specific locations. Obviously, there's been very heavy themes in the previous presentations around these unexplained deviations of course, and they're vitally important. And when you look at those deviations of course, and you look at reductions in speed, or more importantly, where the deviation occurred. It could also be significant, such as known or suspected transshipment locations. You also see patterns of where vessels may undertake a voyage transatlantic or to source of transit countries without ever making landfall or entering a port. And if that happens, you'd have to ask the question, if not, why not? We do look at crew. We look at crew primarily around the areas of profiles in terms of crew composition, such as ranks, ratings, nationalities, and ages. And then also, are any of the crew obviously adversely known? We also look at the crew that have joined the vessel, who has joined the vessel and in what ports, or did they all join together? This information allows us to an assessment of if the crew fit an adversely known profile. We examine cargo. While it is automatically analysed by customs systems, we look at obviously the declared cargo, where is the cargo coming from, and who is the cargo destined for. Sometimes you can gain further insights in relation to the cargo, be it is it bulk or containerized or refrigerated containers. This allows an assessment of the cargo, but also provides additional insight, such as the access of stevedores or other third parties from the previous port to inside the vessel. When you examine previous history, it's very important to understand, is the vessel operating outside of its normal area of operations? Has there been recent changes in the area of operation of the vessel, such as operating around Europe and now heading for South America or West Africa? Has there been recent changes to the vessel flag, or also has there been any dry docking or any known alterations to the vessel? Other vessel behaviour variables could be analysis of port state controls, peer analysis, and examples or identification of uneconomic activity. Port state control data can give an indication of the vessel standards and operation, and certainly crew conditions. And this would normally be quite a strong indicator where we're looking at crew-based smuggling. We would examine, has there been multiple detentions and what type of deficiencies were encountered. Peer analysis enables an understanding of how a vessel operates when compared to similar classes of vessels, where you could certainly look at the vessel utilisation, the number of hours in port, at sea or at anchor, or an indication if the vessel is involved in economic activity where, as some of the previous slides mentioned, where there is no obvious commercial motive to the vessel's operations based on its pattern of life or its current location. Stakeholders may seem an unusual behavioural indicator, but we do place a very high importance on outreach to stakeholders in port, search and rescue, sea fisheries protection, and other coastal communities in Ireland. We encourage these stakeholders to report to our confidential phone numbers. We collate these reports and have done for a number of years, and we examine these reports from the type of smuggling event, the suspected vessel, as well as from a geographical or location specific, which provides further insight in the future in that it could be a suspected smuggling event, which, if it has been successful, there is a chance that it will be attempted again. When we look at the past, certainly in Ireland, some of our biggest seizures for drugs and tobacco and cigarettes have involved every class of vessel, from a pleasure craft to a merchant vessel. The past, our intelligence and international engagement tells revenue customs that the risk is present and we must remain vigilant in what remains a highly complex and challenging environment. Certainly when we look to the future, the approach to utilising behavioural analysis and creating actionable insight has changed dramatically over the last number of years, driven by both analytics, machine learning and data fusion. This provides the ability to systematically carry out numbers of risk assessments across multiple data sources simultaneously and seamlessly. The challenge for the future is to have the ability to nuance and leverage that capability to create even more meaningful and actionable insights. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a great presentation, Andrew. I really enjoyed that. Thank you, gentlemen, for answering questions in the question and answer room. I'm just going to follow on the question with Andrew, and read it across to Keith, if I may. So Andrew, would you please comment on whether there's a culture amongst, or let's just call border control agency or agencies such as the one sitting around the table this afternoon, is there a culture of not wanting to share information? It's a theme that's coming out in the questions. It's one I've often wondered about. It's odd that we as human beings are continuously sharing information via our smartphones on Facebook and the like, but in our agencies and our companies, we tend to be resistant to sharing. Do you see that as a problem? Do you see it improving, or is it not a problem at all? Everything's tickety-boo. And then I'll come on to Keith afterwards.
In Ireland, I suppose the first thing is that we're quite a small agency and country in terms of our administration. So it is quite easy to have quite flat structures where the information does get shared. I suppose for Ireland, we are members of MAOCN, and I think that has been a huge enabler of the flow of intelligence and our capability to access intelligence. And I suppose we're quite a good example in Ireland where we will have vessels that we will submit to MAOCN as vessels of interest, and develop those operations where we'll be quite confident that in the majority of cases those vessels will be interdicted in other jurisdictions. And I think that's been a critical point of the success of MAOCN, that the majority of intelligence that's received is interdicted by other countries as opposed to the country that actually offered the original intelligence or identified the suspicious vessel.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know why I'm staring at my screen. I should stop sharing. The next question is, Keith, could you just comment on that from your more strategic perspective, the issue of culture and are people sharing information willingly?
That's a very good question, and one that I think great strides have been made over a number of years. But there are two issues. One's structural, I think one's cultural. So John mentioned earlier, obviously, that at times information can't be shared because of the source from where it comes and the caveats that are put on that by an agency, certainly where you get involved in agents working with security and intelligence services. So there will always be some structural difficulties. But without wishing to name the country, anyone who's read my CV will probably suss it out. I have worked in a country and other countries where cultural issues have meant that organizations are measured, their success is measured on the seizures. And therefore, there's a feeling that if they share information, then another country or another partner may effectively steal that seizure from them, and therefore there's a need to keep the information tight and close. And I think it's those kind of cultural barriers that we need to remove, and anything that disincentivizes the sharing of information, I think needs to be removed. It's too old-fashioned. So I'm sure Jose will mention that the flow of information is probably better now than it probably has been, but I still suspect it could still be better still amongst all the partners.
Very helpful. Jose, I'm just going to change the subject slightly. That there has been some questions about containers, and you said that MAOCN doesn't cover containers. Perhaps you could just put a little bit more detail on that. I'm guessing because containers are extremely difficult to do and the technology is not there, but perhaps you'd just like to elaborate on that a little bit, please.
Yes, well, I'm going to be hopefully not disrespectful. It's not because it's very hard to do. Actually, it's the opposite. I mean, there's the founding fathers of MAOCN have decided, and in my opinion, well, that there was a gap regarding what I think the English language calls uncanalizing maritime drug trafficking. Therefore, our activity focuses on all kind of vessels crossing the Atlantic, but not commercial vessels with containers on, or private jets or even propellers crossing the Atlantic, but not commercial airplanes. I think that regarding containers, there's a lot of tools in place to control and know far more better than regarding vessels, where the container is right now in this precise moment. For most of them, you can have that data. But the idea, I believe, of our founding fathers was that there are already a lot of agencies dealing with containers, and Mayocan was created to fill in a gap, not to overlap with existing agencies. So for containers, you have, along with the custom and border service of all the countries, we have the UNODC, you have the World Custom Organization. I think that subject is pretty much covered. We all know difficulties in addressing and tackling that issue, considering the millions of containers that travel the world on daily basis. But I think the decision was for us, again, to fill a gap rather than overlapping with in an area that is already, I would say, fairly covered. I don't know if I answered the question properly.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm going to move on to John now. We've only got a few more minutes, and I know Iris wants to make a few comments at the end. But John, I really loved your case study, and I thought that was the detail that went into that was fascinating. Do you see changes in the behaviors of the criminals and the ships as a result of the increasing capability that we've been talking about this afternoon?
I'm not sure that we know or are able to know what we don't know. I mean, there's obviously vessels that are engaged as we speak in criminal activity, and we're not detecting that behavior. So being able to identify that is a bit of a challenge. But I think the things that are common in the various vessels that were on that list, and that we've, the Mayoc and JADF South and DEA have observed over the years, still remains the same. We're still looking at some of the same sorts of indicators that help us sort out legitimate economical commerce, maritime commerce, from those things that are not appearing to be legitimate. And that's our starting point as we use the tools that we have, as identifying vessels that appear to be engaged in unlawful activity, and then trying to find other information that helps support that. I don't know that there's any change underway. I think the ones that are smart commingle their illicit activity with very clean commerce. For example, the rip loads, as we were talking about in containers, those that throw rip loads at the port on vessels that run a regular route, never loiter, those folks are a completely different problem set, and something that I don't think, at least in the short term, Windward will be able to address, or us as investigators will be able to detect via vessel behavior. But that, to me, is the trend, or where transnational organized crime should go, is avoiding vessels like the Throne or the Esser, where there's non-economical activity, because that's what we're queuing on, and we continue to see it to this day.
Fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to just make one or two closing remarks myself, and then hand over to Iris. I thank you, gentlemen, for fabulous presentations, and also for compressing them to fit the time frame, and for your answering questions online, and for your adaptability during the course of the presentation. I must also thank Iris and the Windward team for setting up this webinar. There's been a great number of attendees. We were well over 136 at one point, so that was really great. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, for your questions. I've just got a couple of points to make. I'm a huge fan of these sorts of situational awareness platforms. I think we will see dramatic change in the next 5 to 10 years. I think there will be numerous data sources that will come in. There's an exponential increase in number of sensors going into space. Connectivity is improving. AI is growing. ML, machine learning, is happening all the time. The behaviors are easier to spot. We're going to see a big change. From when I was a young midshipman and we all worried about sea blindness, we're now in a vision of sea era. If you throw enough beans at it, you can see as much as you want to see. And there is an opposite to illegal behavior, and that is legal behavior. And there are, I hate just like to remind everybody, there are lots of people out there who go to sea about their rightful, lawful business. And these sorts of situational awareness platforms can be used for that as well, to improve efficiencies and safety and so on. And if you want to get people out to a wind farm, you can do it safely and efficiently if you've got situational awareness. Same for aquaculture and fishing and all those sorts of things. So all the skill sets that are being evolved here are going to transform how we understand and monitor our sea spaces in the future and derive socioeconomic benefit from them. And Andrew will be pleased to hear that I reckon you'll see an increase in revenues as a result of it, legal revenues as opposed to that derived from fining people. So with no further ado, thank you, Iris, for pulling this together, for herding the panelists over the last couple of weeks, organising rehearsals and so on, and thank you to our lovely audience. I'd love to give you all a proper round of applause, but sadly we can't do that these days, so you have to have a virtual one. Iris, the floor is yours.
So I just want to say thank you all. Thank you for the amazing speakers. Thank you, Nick, for moderating this session beautifully. For me, it's been really amazing. I just wanted to say that if we didn't get to any of the question, we are going to answer everything by email, so don't worry. You will get your answers. And we will be sharing the recording of the webinar in the next few days. And you have you will get our contact details if you want to keep on the discussion. And just once again, thank you everybody. Thank you for joining us. And I hope it's going to be a first webinar out of many that we will have in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.